our dear viewers, and welcome to this edition of Africa Today. Indeed, a very important conference for the COP27 took place in the Red Sea resort of Sharm el-Sheikh, and many decisions were taken earlier today. After wrapping up the COP27, Foreign Minister Sameh Shoukry held a press conference with UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres. Shoukry assured that the decisions that were reached in the conference are the way to transfer to the climate neutrality. We'll be shedding light about the activities and the remarks and recommendations of the COP27 in our episode today. But first, we'll be taking this report. Will vulnerable nations least responsible for the planet heating emissions have been battling for 3 decades to get wealthy polluters to pay for the climate damages. But a concreted effort among developing countries to make it the defining issue of the conference melted the resistance of the wealthy polluters, long fearful of open-ended liability, and gathered unstoppable momentum as the talks progressed. More details.
At the end of COP27 conference, a decision to create a loss and damage fund was the first item confirmed on Sunday morning, after fraught negotiations went overnight with nations clashing over a range of issues around curbing planet heating emissions. Mohamed Ado, Executive Director of Power Shift Africa, said that at the beginning of those talks, loss and damage was not even on the agenda, and now they are making history. He said, quote, "It just shows that this UN process can achieve results and that the world can recognize the plight of the vulnerable must not be treated as a political football," end quote. Loss and damage covers a broad sweep of climate impacts, from bridges and homes washed away in flash flooding to the threatened disappearance of cultures and whole island nations to the creeping rise of sea levels. Observers say that the failure of rich polluters both to curb emissions and to meet their promise of funding to help countries boost climate resilience means that losses and damages are inevitably growing as the planet warms. Even attribution science now makes it possible to measure how much global warming increases the likelihood or intensify of an individual cyclone, heat wave, drought or heavy rain event. This year, an onslaught of climate-induced disasters, from catastrophic floods in Pakistan to severe drought-threatening famine in Somalia, battered countries already struggling with the economic effects of the COVID-19 pandemic and soaring food and energy costs. Observers say the agreement was a balancing act over seemingly unbridgeable differences. On the one hand, the G77 and China bloc of 134 developing countries called for the immediate creation of a fund at COP27, with operational details to be agreed later. Richer nations like the United States and European Union accepted that countries in the crosshairs of climate-driven disasters need money, but favored a mosaic of funding arrangements.
To shed more light on the issue, we are very much delighted to be joined over the phone by Ambassador Hussein Haridi, former Assistant Foreign Minister. Good afternoon, Mr. Ambassador.
Good afternoon, madam.
Ambassador Haridi, the UN's COP27 Climate Summit approved on Sunday the creation of a special fund to cover the losses suffered by the vulnerable nations hit by the impact of the global warming. How do you weigh the move?
Well, I guess one major breakthrough that took place in the context of COP27 at Sharm el-Sheikh has been effectively the agreement on setting up a fund for loss and damage in relation with the impact of climate change on developing countries in general and on Africa in particular. This is the first time in the history of the conferences of the United Nations, of the parties to the United Nations framework agreement concerning climate change, that this principle of loss and damage has been acknowledged. So, of course, this is a great step forward. And I guess developing countries have warmly welcomed such an agreement and the setting up the fund. And of course, now in the next COP28 at that will be hosted by the Emirates. Hopefully, the parties to the conference, to the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, would approve the figure of the funding and the sources of the funding.
Yes. How far, Mr. Ambassador, does the deal address the needs for the developing nations, for rich polluters, in order to compensate them for the destruction from the weather extremes?
Well, now after setting up the fund, of course, which meets the aspirations of developing countries, now the parties to the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change have to weigh how much, supposing that the necessary funds would be raised, how much would be dedicated to compensate for loss and damage, and how much would be earmarked or helping developing countries in adapting to the effects of climate change, like drought, like flooding. Of course, in the years to come, developing countries have to come up with a deal or with a concept that could be accepted by all nations in this respect, madam. Because this is when we are speaking about loss and damage, compensating for loss and damage, we are speaking about billions of dollars. So supposing, even if we suppose that in the next summit there will be an agreement on the sums needed to compensate developing countries for loss and damage, how much will be left for the same countries to adapt to climate change? So I guess this is something that from now till COP28, I guess it's up to developing countries, particularly the African countries, to come up with some kind of a joint vision concerning this point, madam.
Sir, actually the participants did not reach a consensus on the cutting of the emissions. How is that could be dealt with later on, and why they did not reach to a conclusion regarding this very alarming issue?
Well, we have, when assessing the results of COP27, we have to take into account the fact that this conference took place in a very challenging international environment.
Indeed.
Particularly due to the war in Ukraine and its negative impact on food security and on energy prices and energy security throughout the world. So in these developments were reflected in the positions taken by all the participants in this COP27. So, of course, you have countries, oil-producing countries, among developing countries that haven't committed to cut the emissions. And on the other hand, already oil-producing countries in OPEC were very reluctant, have been reluctant to agree on any new commitments to end carbon emissions in the atmosphere. So the Egyptian presidency of the COP27 had to steer the conference and reach some kind of a compromise. But this compromise, of course, we have to build on this compromise.
Indeed.
This compromise is not enough. There are some parties to the conference, and very influential ones, who are not happy that the COP27 has not reiterated the international commitment as worded in the what's called the Glasgow Climate Pact last year, to keep the temperaturized in the vicinity of 1.5. Having said that, when we speak about the not to increase the temperature above 1.5, let me stress the fact that we are already at 1.2, Mara. So what we are speaking about here when we talk about commitment, ironclad commitments to 1.5, is that we are speaking about 0.3. So, well, one of the conclusions that come up in this COP27 is that the world is in a transition. And due to this fact that we are in a transition, you can't expect 200 countries. This is the number of countries that participated in COP27. You don't expect the 200 countries would come to an overall agreement. But having said that, I guess everyone at COP27 could leave Sharm el-Sheikh satisfied that part of his demands were met. But also, on the other hand, COP27, or whether we are speaking about COP27 or previous conferences or coming conferences, next conferences, we have to take into account that the mankind is facing an existential threat, an existential challenge to its future.
Indeed. Ambassador Hussein Haridi, former Assistant Foreign Minister, always a pleasure to listen to your very precious input, sir. Thank you very much and have a lovely day. And indeed, the press conference was held on Sunday at the end of the COP27 UN Climate Change Conference in Egypt's Red Sea resort of Sharm el-Sheikh. During the press conference, Cairo asked participants to deal with the responsibility and make badly needed decisions to face the climate change. More details with Sameh al-Sharif.
After wrapping up COP27 conference, a press conference was held with UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres and COP27 President Sameh Shoukry. During the press conference, Shoukry assured that the decisions that were reached in the conference are the way to transfer to climate neutrality. He said that the conference did not abide by traditional resolutions, pointing out that the conference agreed on establishing losses and damages fund to confront negative effects of climate change. He said Sharm el-Sheikh summit had put all the climate issues in an executive frame as a reference, outlining that Egypt will resume working in the climate issues during its presidency till handing over the coming round to Emirates. He said Sharm's adaptation program confirms a work plan that will preserve the planet temperature. He added that the COP27 conference worked on overcoming all challenges of climate change. Shoukry said the conference agreed on all the concerned decisions to face the damages of climate change. He also said the world has reached a critical stage with regards to climate challenges and that meetings were held with all parties to reach the closing consensus. Shoukry said means of committing to the climate agenda and planning the suitable scheme to address the Paris Agreement topped the agenda of the talks. He said participants were asked to deal with responsibility and make badly needed decisions to face climate change.
Cairo launched the Friends of the Greening National Investment Plans in Africa and Developing Countries initiative. The initiative is set to develop the process of planning and designing economic policies that take into account the climate change. More details.
The Ministry of Planning and Economic Development, Hala Said, said the main pillar of the initiative is developing the process of planning and designing economic policies that take into account climate change. That is in addition to improving the process of evaluating work made in the field of mitigation and adaptation, while identifying gaps and the extra effort needed. She said the Friends of the initiative are voluntarily committed to working to increase the share of green projects in their national investment plans by no less than 30% in 2030, while tracking and monitoring public investments directed at the climate action and identifying gaps and required support. The initiative also includes establishing a knowledge exchange platform and a capacity building center to share best practices and experiences. It also develops tools and methodologies that support environmentally friendly efforts in national reinvestment plans. With regards to Egypt, Said indicated that Egypt launched the Environmental Sustainability Standards Guide, intending to transform the model of both the government and the private sector towards accelerating the transition to a green economy and green recovery, as well as increasing the share of the green economy.
Indeed, a very important conference took place in the Red Sea resort of Sharm el-Sheikh during the past almost 2 weeks, covering many elements of the climate change and the challenges that we are facing in order to face its repercussions. Foreign Minister Sameh Shoukry, addressing the final session of the UN Climate Conference, said that the world had reached a critical stage with regard to the climate challenges and that the meetings were held with all parties to reach the closing consensus. He said that means of committing to the climate agenda and planning the suitable scheme to address the Paris Agreement topped the agenda of the talks. He also said that the participants were asked to deal with the responsibility and make badly needed decisions to face the climate change. A very successful conference took place hosted by Egypt in the Red Sea resort of Sharm el-Sheikh. Well, with that, our dear viewers, we come to the end of this edition of Africa Today. Maïsi Rabia signing off. Many thanks for watching.